Ken, thank you so much. This is episode 5 of Between Two Barrels. So you have, I mentioned earlier to you, you've always been a little bit of a guinea pig when it comes to my new initiatives and accept immediately and don't even ask questions. I only told you, please, can you organize 2 barrels? And there you go. You came with, I don't know, a couple of hundred. But this is the first setting we had outside of our studio, which is our cellar. And we couldn't be in a better place to talk about wine and specifically about Mr. Chenin himself. So Ken, thank you very much. And I want to start from the origins. So you have a background in hotel and restaurant. So you don't have actually a winemaking or farming background. And sometime in the 90s, I believe, you've put your eyes on a farm and you decided to go into farming with your wife Teresa and your family.
Sure.
So what was the drive? I mean, do you want an early retirement, or did you have actually a ambitious plan behind it?
In terms of early retirement, Nicolò, you can sleep when you're dead, so that's not going to happen. For me, it was really a question of, my background was hotel management. I studied hotel management. I worked for Southern Sun Hotels. I worked in an opening management team, which took hotels over from the architects and builders and got them ready for the new management to run the hotels. And then from there, we went on into a restaurant. I went to help a friend of mine with a restaurant, and we got going with this restaurant, and eventually I bought the restaurant from him, and then bought another restaurant, opened up another restaurant, and went into partnership eventually with Marc Guibert, who's probably one of the finest chefs this country's ever seen, like Maître Cuisinier de France, a really superb chef, great guy. And we worked together. We ended up with a group of restaurants. In 1993, Mr. Mandela was out of jail. This country was going to its first democratic elections in 94. And we came down to the Cape to a friend's wedding. And I showed my wife around, and I showed her all the vineyards I was buying fruit from, or was buying wine from in those days. Yeah. The Spears and the Fairviews and the Baxbergs. And we were going around to Meerlust. And already in the early 90s, we'd been dealing with these people for 15 years in the restaurants, and I was just so amazed. Simon Such, Delheim, they were really just Rustenfriede. And I went to go see Jannie Engelbrecht one evening at Rustenfriede, and he was famous for the fact that he never had a sunset without a fire, and he bride every single night. That was every night. And we were standing having a glass of wine, and I said to him, Jannie, isn't there a farm somewhere around here that they haven't yet kind of realized the value? And he said, yeah, down there near the ocean towards the sea. He said, but that farm's planted with Chenin Blanc. And then he went on to say, en met daai Bobbejaanskheid gronde sal jy nooit Cabernet kan maak nie.
So you have to translate that for me.
So he said, well, Bobbejaanskheid is Bobbejaan baboon poo ground.
Okay.
He says, you'll never make Cabernet.
Wow.
So I was like, maybe that's not a bad thing, because everybody's trying to make Cabernet. So what's the unsung hero? If there's Chenin Blanc planted there, maybe that's the one that nobody's done, that needs work done, and let's see if we can't do that.
Well, I call that intuition.
Sure.
Wow.
We came to see the property, we came to see the farm, my wife and I, and this place was ramshackled. It was broken. The main homestead was built in 1694. The roof had caved in. The floor inside was floating in 50 millimeters of water. It was just unbelievable that somebody owned a Cape Dutch homestead on an historical property which was first planted in 1689. The vines, according to the records in the archive, tell us that this property had vines planted in 1689.
Amazing. That's history there.
I just couldn't believe this history and the fact that somehow nobody loved it enough to look after it. And I thought, this has to happen.
Wow.
And it was on an auction. The country was in a terrible state. People were leaving the country. The property market was at its lowest. And I convinced my wife to let me buy the biggest piece of property we couldn't afford.
That was really a very good choice. So thank you, Teresa, for agreeing to do that. And so fast forward, I mean, this is quite incredible. So from this starting point, fast forward we have a flagship wine, the FMC, which is in our glass at the moment, in 2018 vintage, which has a very particular significance, and which we'll get just now to it. Yourself as being Mr Chenin, recognized globally as Mr Chenin, and probably single-handedly, or one of the main drivers to have put on the map a South African white wine, which would represent the country as a winemaking country in this new era globally. And this is quite an incredible achievement. So FMC, what does it signify for you, and especially this 2018 vintage after what happened last year? Maybe you can tell me a little bit about this.
Nicolò, when you talk about it, it sounds like it was just the obvious choice and I knew what I was doing. I have to tell you it wasn't so obvious. And we started off, I tasted all the fruit on the farm. The best grapes we had on the farm, according to my taste, was our Sauvignon Blanc. We had 3 vineyards of Sauvignon Blanc. And we had a vineyard right down at the bottom on Coffee Clip, and a good old vineyard on a small trellis. And I took these grapes to Mike Dobrovich in 1994. And Mike helped me. Mike basically showed me the way. And he said he could crush them and settle in a tank, but I needed barrels because he had no fermentation space. So I went to Mulderbosch. Kevin Arnold kindly helped me with some old second full or third full white wine barrels and Hempy's du Toit. So we got some older white wine barrels, which were, nobody was even doing white wine in barrel in those days. Yeah. We got some older white wine barrels, took them to Mike, crushed the grapes, pressed them, let them settle overnight, and then next day into barrel for fermentation. And I made my first wine, was a Sauvignon, barrel fermented. We called it Blanc Fumé, 1994.
Right, American style.
And I thought this would work. Well, it didn't really work. It was not so popular. And everybody was like, yeah, but it's Sauvignon Blanc and it's wood aged. So I thought, well, okay, what else can we do? So we then went a step further with Martin Meinert. I went to Martin, very good friend at the time and still a wonderful friend. Just spent the morning with him having coffee and talking nonsense. And I said to him, what are we going to do with Chenin Blanc? Can we do a partially barrel fermented Chenin? And we went to France. We went to go and see Bernard Germain at Chateau de Fel in the Loire Valley. And he was doing 400-liter white wine barrel fermented Chenin Blanc, medium toast barrels. And we were amazed. We were just amazed that this is exactly what we wanted to do. And it was happening already. And he was so far ahead of his French counterparts. He was light years ahead. Incredible. In those days, in the 90s. And so we spent some time with Bernard, had a look at what he was doing, came back, imported barrels from Bernard, got him to be our broker for barrels, started making Chenin. And then I said to Martin, how about we make the best white wine in the world? And Martin was like, oh, dude. He's like, oh, you got to be here 30, 40 years. I said, where? Why? What's the prescription? Why 40 years? Tomorrow, we make the best white wine.
Especially in a New World country.
We're going to make the best white wine in the world. And he was like, no, I don't think so. We started in 97, and we started making what we were going to call Chenin Project. That was the name that we conjured up. And we went on to make this wine, 97 special barrels, toasted heads. We did everything except climb through the bunghole. We stirred the lees, we added nitrogen for the yeast, you name it. We did everything that you could possibly do. We got round to tasting the wine 9 months later. It was absolutely terrible. Yeah.
I mean, head off to admit that as well.
So that was 97. 98, it wasn't any better. 9 months later, a year later, we tasted this, it was terrible. 99, we got so thrilled with ourselves, two guys going, yeah, it'll get better. Of course it'll get better. Yeah, let's bottle it.
It takes quite some perseverance.
And we bottled the 99.
Year.
We never sold a bottle. We opened that all up and poured it all out again. And the 2000 we took to a London Wine Trade Fair. And the 2000 went like an absolute rocket at the Wine Trade Fair. Matthew Jukes identified it as his white wine of the show. He brought Jancis over, he brought Oz Clark over, he brought Tim over. He was bringing all these people over to us saying, come, do this, do that, do this, taste that. It became the wine, the talk of the show at the London Wine Trade Fair in 2000.
And I mean, FMC, as I said, it's one of those flag bearers. Can you say flag bearers?
Yeah.
For South African wine. And it's such an interesting thing. You mentioned Blanc Fumé. And I just had like a epiphany about Robert Mondavi, who was the one who introduced the Sauvignon Blanc into America and Napa, and he was the one that basically made that region, and Blanc Fumé was one of the things he started. I mean, there's quite a lot of parallels here, I must say. And so FMC had a very long career, and on the best wine lists in the world, scooped awards everywhere, stands today up there. And then last year, I mean, you got the drought, few consecutive years that
3 years of drought
really brought your production down to nothing, and that little bit which was left, which was of very high quality, you lost entirely last year to a warehouse fire.
A warehouse fire, you know. When there's no accounting for what happens, you know, that's what happened. Unfortunately, we lost the vintage, the 17 vintage. We shipped one shipment to England, so there was a little bit in the UK market. I bought some of the 16 back from one of our big clients. I bought 16 back so I could
try and
keep the market in supply. We didn't rush to bring the 18 forward. I said, no, you can't do that. And we've literally only just brought the 18 onto the market now, which is its correct timing. And I have to tell you that when the 18 was on the bottling line, I took a bottle off the line, I went, opened it up. I sat down by myself, opened it up, and I'm not sure if there were tears in the glass or wine.
This is the Phoenix vintage. I mean, it raised from the ashes, and I must say it's really spectacular. So FMC, I mean, doesn't need introduction, but I want to move on to something that is quite a fun project and talk about your second dirty little secret.
You know, I wondered what else could be done with Chenin Blanc. What else was there? And the most incredible vineyards, I was looking, found a vineyard up right through the Swartland, up on the Pekingese Kloof, at about 500 meters above sea level, dry land, bush vines, the most unbelievable sandy vineyard. You can't ride a bicycle through that vineyard, you'd sink. That's how sandy it is. And it's just that crushed, fine kind of granite sand. And from that, I thought we could make something really special. And I went the full hog. I went completely, you know, this kind of natural things overdone. But I wanted to have the wine as hands-off as possible, as little intervention as possible, and go through Malo, understand the difference of picking early enough to have enough acidity that when you go through Malo, you still have the balance of acid that you require. And then using neutral oak, so the wine's not bent with wood.
Right.
Neutral oak, just oxidation and time. And then finally, I wanted to kind of look at what happens when you take one vineyard and you keep the wine and wait for the next vintage, and then look at what's the potential of multi-vintage blends out of one vineyard. It happens in Champagne every day. 90% of Champagne is non-vintage, multiple vintage blends.
You enhance the expression of
so
of
my
the wine.
thought was to limit myself to one site, one vineyard specifically, handle that as carefully, as naturally as possible, minimum intervention, and then work with 2, 3, 4 vintages.
Like Vega Sicilia.
And create,
Unico.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what Dirty Little Secret is.
So
Dirty, unfiltered.
So this is number 2.
Yeah.
So how many vintages are in here?
This is 3 vintages.
3 vintages.
This is 3 vintages.
And it's interesting. So it's, I mean, again, you show, and maybe that is actually the answer to my next question. So what does it take? And you show courage because you go out with, yes, you are Mr Chenin, but you go out with a white wine in South Africa, over 1,000 rand, and you give it a name which is provocative, to say the least. And the market receives it beautifully. I mean, we have a long list of customers that love this wine. It is a serious wine despite the non-serious name. And
I think that the second edition is more complex than the first, richer, deeper. It has more to offer. And I'm really, really excited about number 3, because number 3 obviously will be mainly from the 19 vintage, which we've already investigated. We've had a look at the barrels of 19. I'm super excited.
Really amazing. So with this new glass of wine, I'm going to have to say goodbye to our YouTube viewers because we reached our limit in time. We're going to keep on going on Instagram. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Pleasure. And we're going to have some more fun now. And if people want to view us, they can do it on Instagram Live.
Well done. Thanks, Nicolò. Thanks
Thank you
so
very
much.
much.